All right. In the last video, we talked about adjectives, and specifically, we talked about what true adjectives are. Okay. And as a little review, we said that true adjectives have to come right before the noun. Okay. They must come right before the noun. Okay. They can have a comparative form, or they must have a comparative form, which means you compare two things. They must have a superlative form. Okay, and then they also must be used as be able to be used as a predicate adjective. And I'm going to give you an example that we did last time, just so that we don't forget. Okay, so right before the noun means, and we'll use two. We'll actually use two things, so we can see. Right before the noun, we'll use the adjective the. Slow cars. Okay, we can see that the is an article, and slow is the true adjective because it must come right before the cars. You can't say slow the cars. Okay, so comparative form, we know that the comparative form, when you're comparing two things, you can say one car is slower than the other. So a comparative form, you add er onto the adjective. The superlative form has the est ending. Okay, so we can say the slowest car, and then we can also use it as a predicate adjective. Okay, the car is slow. Okay, a predicate adjective because the predicate is the start of the verb. Noun right here, verb right here, and we describe the word car after the verb. Okay, the car is slow instead of saying the slow car. Okay, the car is slow is actually a full sentence because it has a subject and it has the predicate, or subject and verb. All right, so those are the characteristics of a true adjective. Now we're going to get a little bit into different ways of forming the comparative and the superlative forms of adjectives, because in English we borrow our language from different languages. We have some of our language based on Latin and French and true English, and so we have different rules. And English actually has two ways of forming comparative, forming the comparative and superlative forms. Okay, and so we're going to talk about that. Obviously, we've already seen that we can use er for the comparative, and we can use est for the superlative. Okay, so we know that already, and I'm not going to write that at the same time, but there are some words, adjectives, we can't use er, est to. We use the words more or most. Okay, and don't let that confuse you, because I'm going to give you several examples so you understand. All right, so an example, if you were to talk about someone being foolish, okay, the boy was foolish, you cannot say the boy was foolisher. Okay, you cannot say the boy was the foolishest. Okay, we just don't say that. But you could say the boy was more foolish than the girl. And I'll actually write the boy. The boy. Okay. Was more foolish than the girl. Or you could also say, well, we're using that as a predicate adjective. And you could also, the boy was the most foolish. Okay. So you could say most foolish. So that's how we write the comparative and superlative forms of the word foolish. Now we're going to learn some rules as to when we use which form. Okay. So another example is reluctant, more reluctant, most reluctant. Reluctant means you don't want to do something, or you're hesitant about doing something. Vicious means mean, the vicious dog, right? The dog was more vicious than the cat. The dog was the most vicious of all the other dogs, okay? Of all the dogs. So more, most, comparative form, superlative form, more, and using more and most, okay? So why does English have two different ways of writing comparative and superlative forms? It's basically historical, all right? I've already said that we've taken our English from a variety of languages. Words of English origin, true English origin, use the words er and est for the comparative and superlative forms. Words that we borrow from French use more for the comparative form, and the words most for their superlative form. All right? So that's basically how it is. And I'm going to give you a couple of very simple rules to follow so you understand. Basically, short adjectives. I'm just going to say short adjectives. One syllable adjectives. One syllable adjectives use one syllable always is er or est, okay? Three syllable adjectives, I spelled that wrong, sorry. Three syllable adjectives always is more and most, okay? And then two syllable can go either way. That's not quite as clear, but all one syllable adjectives use er. Okay, so if I were to use the color word black, something is blacker, something is that's the black, that car is blacker than the other. That car is the blackest Mustang I've ever seen, okay? So black, but a three-syllable word, three-syllable adjective is always going to use more or most, okay? Let's think of a three-syllable adjective. The word uncommon, okay? That's an uncommon jacket, or that's an uncommon piece of jacket. That's an uncommon piece of clothing. You wouldn't say uncommoner or uncommonest. It's three-syllable. Uncommon. So you would have to say that's the most uncommon, if you were the jacket I've ever seen. Okay? Or you could say that jacket is more uncommon than hers. Okay, so most of this is a superlative, more is the comparative. So three-syllable words, more or most. Two-syllable words, or one-syllable word, er or est. Now, the thing that makes it tricky is two-syllable words can go either way. All right. So there's a couple of rules that we need to look at for two-syllable words, and of course you can read them as always. I'm just highlighting a couple things that are important. And it says here are two generalizations that can help you in deciding which type of comparative or superlative to use. It says two-syllable adjectives that end in an unstressed vowel tend to use the okay, whatever. I'm not going to read that to you. That's just confusing. So I'll just give you some examples. All right. So we'll just look at some examples. So if a word ends in le, you're going to use er or est. All right. So feeble or gentle. Gentle, you're going to say gentler. You're going to say the gentlest. Okay. If something ends in a y or an ier, like a y, that's tacky or happy. Okay. Then of course you're going to use the spelling change, just like we've always seen with the y that acts as a vowel. So when we change the ending of the word, happier, happiest. Okay. So those are comparative and superlative if they end in a Y or an LE. All right, so easy enough. Now there are some two-syllable words that will always have more or most instead. All adjectives ending in ing and all adjectives ending in ed. And basically these are verb forms that have been changed into adjectives by the way they're used, okay? Amusing, we would say more amusing, most amusing. So anything that ends in ing or ed is always going to use more and most in their comparative and superlative forms. So any verb that's used as an adjective, and we're going to get into what those are called later, but any verb that's used as an adjective will use the word more or most, okay? So for example, tempting, more tempting, most tempting. Strained, down here you can see more strained, most strained. Recorded, more recorded, most recorded. Exploited, whatever. So any of those things down here, all these are a verb form that's used as an adjective, and we'll talk about that later. Like I said, don't let that confuse you. But anything that describes a noun, the amusing clown, okay? The amusing clown, all right? You would have to say, if you were to compare the clowns, you'd have to say that was the most amusing clown I'd ever seen. Or you could say, that means there's no other clown that's more amusing. Or if you were to compare them, you would say, this clown is more amusing than the other clown. So that's the comparative and superlative form, all right? So hopefully you understand that, and we're going to go back and review this a little bit. And of course, you're going to have access to this, to these pages in the PDF that you can download. But let's go back and look at this a little bit more. Remember, if something ends in LE or a Y, these two syllable adjectives are always going to use the ER, EST endings, okay, for comparative and superlative. If something ends in ING or ED, it's always going to use most, more, or most, okay? So those are just some basic guidelines so you can understand how to write the comparative and superlative forms. A couple other things that are interesting, and this word it confuses a lot of kids, and it's often used incorrectly. Of course, there's a couple examples like here that are irregular, I guess you could say. For example, bad. You don't say badder or most bad. You say worse. Okay? And then you can say worst. That was the worst teacher I've ever had. Okay? You don't say worser or badder or baddest. Okay? And then, of course, good. You don't say gooder or more good. You say better. Or, of course, best. So those are just, there's not very many irregulars like that, but those are the comparative and superlative forms of those two words, bad and good, okay? Far, the word far has two, okay? Two different forms, and they're actually different, they have different meanings, okay? We can say farther and farthest. We can also say further and furthest. And what is the difference between these words? This is a tricky word. It says we use the word farther and farthest for distance. So anytime you're talking about distance, you use this one, okay? Far. If you're talking about a progression of things, then you would use further, and I'll give you an example in a second. It says, please take the farthest seat. So that's distance. It's talking about distance. Or the San Diego Zoo is farther away than, okay, than, I don't know, what, circus, okay? So farther is for distance. Further is a little bit different. and I'll give you the example that they give. It says, are there any further questions? Okay, so are there any additional questions? So we would use further. Furthermore, if you have something more to say. You wouldn't say farthermore, furthermore, but they're all based off the word far, okay? So this one is for distance, and the other one's for everything else, okay? So that's all you have to remember. All right, so hopefully this wasn't too confusing, and if it was, please rewatch the video, or come before school or after school, and it will help you out. There's just a couple little rules that you have to remember, and I'm going to review these with you right away. Short words, one syllable words, very short words. We'll always use the ER or the EST for the comparative and superlative. 3-syllable, we'll always use more or most. Okay, 2-syllable, if they end in LE or Y, we'll always use ER or EST. If they end in a verb ending like ING or ED, they will always use more or most, okay? So that's basically what we have to remember. And remember, the terms that might be tough for you is the word comparative and superlative. Basically, remember, comparative means you're comparing things. Okay? And superlative means that you're setting the word like the most extreme example, okay? So if you're saying that Batman was the worst movie I've ever seen, okay, let's not use an irregular. Let's say that some people think the elephant is the slowest creature, which isn't true, obviously, but it's the slowest creature. It means that some people think that there is nothing slower than the elephant, okay? That's the superlative. So comparing, if you're comparing two things, or the superlative, it means the most extreme example, the slowest, or the, hopefully you're not confused by that. If you are, come in and we'll work it out during class or before class. So the next example, you're going to do one exercise 2.2, and let's do the first example with you so you can get started. And if you have questions, like I said, come before or after school, and that will help you. So, sad, the comparative and the superlative. Obviously, it's already one syllable, so I'm going to say that was sadder. And some of them have spelling changes, as you can see. And that was the saddest movie I've ever seen. Okay? Valuable, valuable. That's 3 syllables, but it ends. It doesn't matter if it ends in LE because it's 3 syllables. All 3-syllable words use more or most. That was the more valuable. That was more valuable. That was the most valuable. Okay, that sale was a more valuable deal than the one last week. Okay, you're comparing the two different sales. Okay, and then of course your improved, 2 syllables that ends in ed, so more improved, most improved. Okay, so you're going to put comparative and superlative, and you're going to have to look back to remember some of the rules if you need to. All right, well, I'll see you in the next video, and I think it goes on to this side. It goes up to 20. Okay, so don't forget to go to number 20, and good luck.